Chapter 1. First Contact. The spaceport of Vian buzzed with activity as races from across the galaxy mingled, their voices a tapestry of the universe's diversity. At the heart of this cacophony was Ethan, a human diplomat who stepped off his spacecraft with a sense of purpose. His mission was clear: to forge peace among civilizations that eyed each other with deep-rooted suspicion. As he navigated through the crowd, his attention was drawn to a commotion at the far end of the terminal. A group of Arcturians, their silver skin shimmering under the artificial lights, were in a heated debate with a delegation from Zephyria. Ethan's curiosity piqued. The Arcturians were known for their advanced technology and formidable military, yet here they were, engaging in what seemed like a diplomatic spat. "Excuse me," Ethan interjected, approaching the group with a polite nod. "I'm Ethan Carter, Earth's delegate. Is there anything I can assist with?" The Arcturians, tall and imposing, turned their piercing gaze upon him. It was then that he noticed her, Mira, an officer whose eyes flickered with intelligence and authority. "I am Mira," she stated, her voice carrying a calm command. "We were discussing the terms of the artifact exchange, but these Zephyrians refuse to acknowledge the safeguards we've proposed." Ethan smiled, extending a hand in greeting, a gesture that Mira regarded with curiosity before tentatively accepting. "Perhaps I could help mediate? Earth has no stake in this matter, which might help me remain neutral." Mira considered this, then nodded. "Very well, Mr. Carter. Your assistance would be appreciated." As they walked towards a quieter corner of the spaceport, Ethan couldn't help but be intrigued by Mira's demeanor. She moved with a grace that belied her strength, and her eyes seemed to take in everything with a sharp, strategic thought. "So, Mira, tell me more about these safeguards," Ethan prompted as they settled at a small table in the terminal's cafe. Mira laid out her datapad, displaying complex diagrams and text in her fluid script. "Our primary concern is security. The artifact is powerful, and in the wrong hands, it could be disastrous. The safeguards are designed to ensure that only those with the correct authorization can access it." Ethan nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "Sounds reasonable. And the Zephyrians? They argue that the safeguards are a way for us to maintain control over the artifact, even after it's handed over," Mira explained, her brow furrowing in frustration. Ethan sipped his drink, pondering the dilemma. What if there was a third-party arbitrator, someone not from Arcturia or Zephyria, to oversee the transition and operation of the safeguards? Mira paused, considering his words. That might work. It would certainly alleviate some concerns regarding impartiality. The discussion continued, with Ethan offering insights and Mira explaining the intricacies of Arcturian technology. As they delved deeper into the matter, Ethan was impressed by Mira's knowledge and her passion for her people's safety. Meanwhile, Mira found herself respecting Ethan's diplomacy and genuine interest in finding a solution. By the time they parted ways, a preliminary agreement had been drafted, and both felt a cautious optimism. "Thank you, Ethan," Mira said sincerely, her hand lingering in his for a moment longer than necessary. "Your perspective was invaluable." Ethan grinned. "I'm just glad I could help. Shall we meet again tomorrow to finalize the details?" "I would like that," Mira replied, a hint of a smile playing at her lips. As Ethan watched her walk away, he felt a stirring of hope. Perhaps this mission would be successful after all, not just for the peace treaty, but for something more personal, something unexpected but potentially wonderful. Chapter 2. Language of Gestures. Ethan adjusted the translation unit on his wrist, glancing around the bustling Vian marketplace. The place was alive with alien voices, the air thick with scents he couldn't quite place, and his eye caught Mira approaching, her silver skin gleaming under the harsh artificial lights. She moved purposefully, a datapad in one hand, her expression as unreadable as ever. "Mira?" Ethan called out as he stepped toward her, raising his hand in a friendly wave. He stopped when he saw her pause, her head tilting slightly in confusion. Her sharp, pale eyes locked onto his hand midair, studying it as though it were a piece of strange machinery. "You're signaling something," she said, her tone more curious than accusatory. "Oh, sorry?" Ethan said, lowering his hand. I forgot. Humans have a lot of gestures that probably don't make sense to you. Gestures? She repeated, narrowing her eyes. You mean movements of the body with intended meaning? Exactly, Ethan said, smiling. A wave, for instance, is a friendly greeting on Earth. It says, "Hello, I see you." Mira regarded him for a moment, then tentatively raised her own hand, mimicking the motion he'd made. It was stiff and deliberate, but there it was, a wave. Not bad, Ethan said, grinning. We'll have you doing the human salute in no time. She gave him a quizzical look. Do all humans use gestures to communicate? Not just gestures. We rely on facial expressions too. Smiles, frowns, the way our eyes move. There's a lot we say without saying a word, Ethan explained. It's kind of second nature. Myra's gaze became even more intent, as though cataloging every muscle in his face. Fascinating. Arcturians are trained to maintain neutral expressions at all times. Showing emotion, even unintentionally, is considered inefficient. Sounds exhausting, Ethan said. How do you tell what someone's feeling? We listen to their words, Mira replied simply. Our language is structured to convey exact meanings. Subtlety is unnecessary. Ethan chuckled. Maybe that's why you find us so baffling. Humans are practically built on subtlety. A raised eyebrow can mean, I doubt that, or that's hilarious, depending on the context. I noticed your brows move often when we speak, Mira admitted. I thought perhaps it was a nervous tic. Ethan laughed. No, not a tic. Just another way to communicate. For humans, the face is an open book. The trick is learning how to read it. Mira studied his face, her silver eyes keen. And what does your face say now? Curious, Ethan said, tilting his head. What do you think? She hesitated, her gaze flitting over his features. You appear amused. Your mouth curves upward, and your eyes narrow slightly at the corners. Pretty good, Ethan said, nodding. Now, let's see if you can match it. He flashed her a smile wide and warm. Mira stared at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, the corners of her lips lifted. The result was subtle, almost shy, but unmistakably a smile. Hey, there you go, Ethan said, impressed. You've got a natural smile. I find it strange, Mira confessed, touching her cheek. We are taught not to reveal emotion, yet this feels pleasant. Smiling's contagious, Ethan said. The more you do it, the more it comes naturally, and people respond to it. Mira considered his words, her expression slipping back into its neutral state. Humans seem to place great importance on nonverbal communication. It's an entirely new language. Well, Ethan said, gesturing for her to follow as they strolled through the market. If you want, I can teach you a bit more. They walked together past stalls of alien fruits and shimmering fabrics, the vendors calling out in a medley of languages. Ethan stopped by a stand selling small trinkets, ornate carvings from a world he didn't recognize. Take this, for example, he said, picking up a piece. When we give a gift, the gesture itself speaks volumes. It says, I value you. I'm thinking of you. No words needed. Mira raised a brow. You convey significance through objects? Sometimes, Ethan said. A gesture like handing this to you, paired with a certain look, would let you know it's not just a transaction. It's personal. She took the small carving from him, her fingers brushing against his. So, if I were to give you something, it would mean I value you? Exactly, Ethan said. Gestures, expressions, tone of voice. All of it works together. It's complicated. Sure. But it also makes everything more human. Mira turned the carving over in her hands, her expression thoughtful. Then perhaps I should practice more of these gestures and expressions. It may help me better understand you and your kind. Ethan smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. I'd say you're off to a pretty good start. As they continued through the market, Ethan showed her more examples of human gestures, demonstrating subtle cues that humans often used without thinking. Mira tried each one. from a simple thumbs up to a slight shrug, though she performed them with the same careful precision she applied to everything. Despite her reserved demeanor, Ethan began to see the faintest hints of something new in Mira. Not just curiosity, but a willingness to adapt, to connect. And while the intricacies of human gestures might have seemed trivial, to Ethan, they represented something greater. A small but significant bridge between two very different beings. The chapter ends with Ethan and Mira walking side by side, the market's lights casting long shadows as they continue their quiet exploration of each other's worlds. One word, one gesture at a time. Chapter 3, Through the Market of Stars. Ethan, Mira's voice carried a touch of exasperation as she quickened her pace to match his. Must you move so quickly through this? What do you call it, market? Marketplace? Ethan corrected gently, turning to give her a crooked grin. And yes, if we don't hurry, the good stuff's gone before you know it. The wide avenues of the interstellar market sprawled before them, lined with stalls that displayed an astonishing array of goods. Fabrics shimmered in unearthly hues. Foods exuded aromas so foreign that Ethan had stopped trying to guess what they were, and trinkets and tools lay in neat arrangements that hinted at both ancient craft and advanced technology. Alien vendors called out in a dozen languages, their tones ranging from melodic to grating, each one trying to outdo the other. Mira glanced around, her movements sharp and deliberate. It seems inefficient. Would it not be simpler to arrange these goods in a catalog and order them electronically? Where's the fun in that? Ethan countered, slowing down just enough so she could draw even with him. Markets like this aren't just about what you buy. It's about the experience, the people you meet, the sights and sounds. You can't replicate this kind of chaos online. Chaos, Mira said flatly. That is precisely what I am observing. Come on, Ethan chuckled. Let's find you something. Something that'll remind you of your time here. I do not require an item to serve as a reminder, Mira replied, but Ethan caught the slight tilt of her head, the curious way her gaze lingered on a nearby stall where a vendor displayed intricate carvings that seemed to glow from within. He turned to her, walking backward for a few steps as he spoke. Think of it as a memento, something you can look at when you're back home and think, hey, that was the time I spent with that infuriating human who kept dragging me through markets. Mira stopped at the stall, and Ethan followed her gaze to a small, delicate sculpture. It appeared to be made of some crystalline material that refracted the light into a cascade of colors. What is it? She asked, not taking her eyes off the piece. The vendor, a diminutive creature with scales that shimmered like oil on water, perked up. Ah, you have an excellent eye, my lady. This is a Rithian soul light, a rare artifact, crafted to capture the beauty of a Rithian sunrise. Observe. As the vendor turned the sculpture slightly, a warm, golden hue spilled across its surface, shifting and deepening. Mira's usually composed expression softened for a fraction of a second. It's beautiful, Ethan said quietly, leaning closer. You should get it. She hesitated, glancing at him. Why? Because it caught your eye, Ethan replied. And sometimes, it's nice to have something beautiful just because it's beautiful. Mira studied the sculpture a moment longer, then looked at the vendor. What is its cost? The vendor rattled off a number that made Ethan's eyes widen. You've got to be kidding me, he muttered, though Mira seemed unfazed. Is that price negotiable? She asked. The vendor gave her a toothy grin and launched into an explanation about the rarity and craftsmanship. But Mira cut him off. You misunderstand. I am not questioning its value. I am offering a counterproposal. Half your stated price. Ethan smothered a laugh as the vendor's scales flared in indignation. Mira, for all her cool demeanor, was a force to be reckoned with when it came to negotiations. After a tense back and forth, the vendor finally relented and accepted her offer, handing her the soul light with a reluctant flourish. Mira turned to Ethan, holding up her prize. There, I have acquired a memento. Ethan's grin widened. Not bad. I might have to take you shopping more often. They moved on, weaving through the market as Ethan pointed out the odd and wonderful. At one stall, He showed her a collection of wind instruments that played melodies by simply being held in the breeze. At another, he convinced her to sample a fruit that changed its flavor with each bite. Sweet, sour, and spicy, Mira said, her silver eyes narrowing slightly as she chewed. Neat, huh? Ethan said. Human taste buds don't get to experience something like that every day. I see why you enjoy this place, she admitted after a moment. It is chaotic, yes, but also engaging. Ethan smirked. Admit it, you're having fun. She tilted her head in that Arcturian way that Ethan had come to recognize as thoughtful. Fun. I believe I am. They wandered further, Mira slowly opening up to the market's charms. She asked more questions, tried more foods, and even allowed Ethan to show her how to haggle over a small, beautifully designed toolkit that she claimed was functional as well as aesthetically pleasing. As the day wore on, Ethan found himself enjoying Myra's company more and more. She wasn't just intelligent and composed. She was curious and willing to step out of her comfort zone. And while Mira didn't outright say it, Ethan could tell she was beginning to see the value in the human way of doing things. Not just the logic, but the emotion, the unpredictability, the spontaneity that made life feel alive. When they finally reached the end of the market's main thoroughfare, the twin suns of Vian were beginning to set, casting the stalls in warm, golden light. Ethan stopped and looked back at the sea of activity behind them. Not bad for a day out, he said. Mira glanced down at the soul light in her hand, the colors shimmering faintly in the fading light. Yes, not bad. Ready to head back? Ethan asked. She nodded, and they turned to walk back toward the spaceport together, the sounds of the marketplace slowly fading behind them. Chapter 4. Dinner Under Two Moons. Ethan glanced out over the sprawling courtyard as he adjusted the settings on the portable cooking unit he'd set up. The twin moons of Vian hung low in the evening sky, casting their pale blue and crimson light over the entire terrace. Alien birds chirped and warbled in the distance, their songs soft but rhythmic. Behind him, Mira stepped into view, her quiet yet deliberate footsteps making him smile. This is a very informal setting, Mira observed, glancing at the assortment of human cooking tools and ingredients Ethan had arranged on a low table. I had anticipated something more professional. Ethan turned and grinned. That's the beauty of it. It's not a business meeting, just dinner, a chance to relax. Mira tilted her head slightly, regarding him with a look that he couldn't quite interpret. Relaxing is not often part of our tradition. Well, we're going to try it anyway, he said, gesturing to the folding chairs he'd set out. Pick a seat. She complied, albeit stiffly. Myra's posture remained impeccably straight, her hands folded neatly on her lap as Ethan crouched near the cooking unit. He began slicing a few vegetables from Earth, then added a local Vionian herb he had sampled earlier. The aroma was subtle at first, but soon it grew, filling the space with a savory scent that made even Mira lean forward slightly. What is that? She asked, her sharp eyes focused on his movements. Just a simple vegetable medley, Ethan said. Earth vegetables, Vian spices, and a little human creativity. Mira raised an eyebrow. Your culinary techniques are unorthodox. You mean messy, Ethan said, laughing. Don't worry, it'll taste good. I will reserve judgment until I have tried it, she replied, though a faint hint of amusement played at the corners of her mouth. As Ethan stirred the pan, the conversation began to flow more naturally. Mira asked about Earth's climates and how humans adapted to such a wide variety of environments. Ethan explained the joy of seasonal changes, describing autumn leaves and winter snowfalls, painting a picture of a world constantly shifting, full of surprises. And what about the foods? Mira asked, genuinely curious now. Do your dishes change with the seasons as well? Absolutely, Ethan said, pointing at the pan. This dish right here? This would be a springtime thing. Fresh, light flavors. Summer would be all about barbecues and outdoor cooking. In winter, we go for rich, hearty stews. Mira seemed to consider this, her hands resting on the table as she leaned forward. I find it intriguing that your culture incorporates environmental factors so deeply into your daily habits. Arcturian meals remain consistent, regardless of external conditions. Well, maybe you're missing out, Ethan teased, plating the finished dish. He set it in front of her, then prepared a plate for himself. Give it a try. Mira studied the food carefully, then picked up the unfamiliar earth fork Ethan had provided. She mimicked his movements as he began eating, her motions tentative but precise. Her expression shifted slightly after the first bite, just a flicker of something different in her eyes. This is not unpleasant, she admitted. High praise, Ethan said, raising his fork in mock salute. It is more complex than I expected, she continued, taking another bite. There are layers of flavor, sweetness, saltiness, a faint bitterness that is not unpleasant. I can see why you enjoy this. Ethan leaned back in his chair, satisfied. Good food, good company. That's what it's all about. Mira paused, her gaze resting on him. Why did you choose to do this? To prepare a meal and share it with me? Ethan shrugged lightly. Because I wanted to. No hidden agenda, no ulterior motives. Just thought it'd be nice to get to know each other a bit better. You are unlike most diplomats I have encountered, she said after a moment. They are often calculating, focused solely on the outcome of negotiations. Well, I do care about the negotiations, Ethan said. But I also think relationships matter. You can't solve problems if you don't understand the people you're working with. Mira nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. You have a unique perspective. It is refreshing. They finished the meal as the moons climbed higher. Assumptions, she said, her back still to him. Not only about humans, but about the way we approach other cultures. There is something to be learned from your methods. Ethan joined her at the edge, standing a comfortable distance away. And I'm learning a lot from you too. You're meticulous, thoughtful, and definitely keep me on my toes. A faint smile touched Myra's lips, though she didn't turn to face him. You have a way of making serious matters feel less burdensome. Food and conversation can do wonders, Ethan said lightly, though he meant it. For a while, they stood in silence, watching as the moons lit up the landscape. The courtyard seemed to hum with a quiet energy, a peaceful moment between two individuals from vastly different worlds. Ethan couldn't help but think that these small moments of connection were just as important as any treaty they might sign. Chapter 5: The Rift. The conference room in the Vian consulate buzzed with quiet tension. Ethan sat at the long, polished table, tapping his pen against his open notes. The other delegates murmured among themselves in various languages, most of which he couldn't follow, but the tone was unmistakable. Something was brewing. When Mira entered, the room fell silent. Her sleek, silver uniform caught the light, and her calm, deliberate movements gave her an air of command that turned heads. She took her seat across from Ethan, her gaze meeting his briefly. He offered her a small nod, but she didn't return it. Instead, she looked straight ahead as the meeting began. An older human diplomat, Gordon Carlyle, cleared his throat and addressed the room. Ladies and gentlemen, we've reached a critical juncture in these negotiations. It's become apparent that certain relationships might be influencing the impartiality of our talks. Ethan stiffened in his chair. The room's temperature seemed to drop as all eyes turned toward him and Mira. He could feel the weight of their stares, the unspoken accusations hanging in the air. Are we really going to do this? Ethan said finally, his voice cutting through the tension. We're here to forge peace, not point fingers at who had dinner with whom. Carlyle's lips pressed into a thin line. It's not about dinner, Mr. Carter. It's about ensuring that all parties are fully committed to their assigned roles. Personal involvement. Hold on, Ethan interrupted, leaning forward. Personal involvement? You think that sharing a meal and exchanging ideas means I can't do my job? It's not just the meal. A delegate from the Zephyrian contingent chimed in, her voice cold and clipped. You've been seen together multiple times, sharing private conversations, walking alone after hours. This is not the behavior of a professional diplomat. Mira finally spoke, her tone as calm as ever. My discussions with Ethan Carter have been strictly professional. If there is any evidence to the contrary, please present it. Carlyle gave her a sharp look. It's not about evidence, Officer Mira. It's about perception. The perception that you and Mr. Carter may be colluding, that your personal rapport could. Rapport? Myra's brow furrowed slightly. If understanding another delegate's perspective is considered collusion, then we are all guilty. Diplomacy demands mutual understanding. Ethan couldn't help but smirk. Well said. Carlyle's face darkened. You're not helping your case, Carter. Leaning back in his chair, Ethan raised his hands. Look, if you want to talk about impropriety, fine. Let's talk about it. But the real issue here isn't what Mira and I talked about over dinner. It's that some people are uncomfortable with the idea that genuine collaboration might actually work. A low murmur rippled through the room. Myra's expression remained unreadable, but Ethan saw her hand clench slightly at her side, a rare sign of emotion. The meeting adjourned with no clear resolution. As the delegates filed out, Carlyle gave Ethan a long, disapproving glance before leaving. Ethan stayed behind, gathering his papers, until he noticed Mira still seated, her hands folded neatly on the table. I apologize if my actions have caused you difficulty, Mira said quietly. Ethan shook his head, setting his papers down. You don't have to apologize. I don't regret a single conversation we've had. She looked at him, her expression almost curious. Even if it jeopardizes your standing here? Yeah, Ethan said without hesitation. Because I came here to actually solve something, not to play politics. Mira studied him for a moment, then gave a slight nod. Your approach is unconventional. Unconventional is kind of my thing, Ethan said, offering a half smile. They left the conference room together, walking side by side through the quiet corridors of the consulate. The tension of the meeting lingered, but so did something else, a sense that neither of them was willing to back down from what they believed in. As they reached the main atrium, Mira paused, turning to Ethan. Your colleagues may be correct about one thing, she said. Ethan raised an eyebrow. What's that? The perception of us, she replied. It may become an obstacle. I am unaccustomed to navigating such personal implications. Ethan exhaled, his breath fogging slightly in the cool air of the atrium. I get it. This is probably the first time anyone's questioned your impartiality. Mira nodded. And you? Not the first time, Ethan admitted with a wry grin. But I'm used to it. As long as we're making progress, that's what matters. She looked at him for a long moment, then gave another small nod. Then we proceed. Yeah, Ethan said, his voice steady. We proceed. They stepped into the atrium's pale light, their footsteps echoing softly. The discussions behind them might have sown doubts, but neither was ready to let those doubts steer them away from the work that still needed to be done. Chapter 6. The Convergence. Ethan paced near the edge of the quiet courtyard, his mind racing. Mira had said she'd meet him here once her latest debriefing was over, but that had been over an hour ago. The cool evening air carried the faint scent of alien blossoms, and the two moons overhead painted the scene in silvery hues. The calm surroundings were no match for the churn of frustration in his chest. When he heard the soft, deliberate footsteps behind him, he turned quickly. Mira emerged from the shadows of the arched walkway, her posture as upright and controlled as ever, but her usually composed expression carried a hint of fatigue. Sorry I'm late, she said. The discussion lasted longer than anticipated. Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. Yeah, I get it. There's always another meeting. I had no intention of keeping you waiting, Mira added, stepping closer. It's fine, Ethan replied, his tone softening. I just wasn't sure if you'd come at all. Mira tilted her head slightly, studying him. I said I would meet you. Why would I not? Because this, Ethan gestured between them, seems to be causing more trouble than it's worth. She paused, her silver eyes searching his face. Do you believe that? I don't know, Ethan admitted, leaning back against the low stone wall that bordered the courtyard. Every time we talk, it feels like I have to explain myself to someone afterward. It's like they don't want us to even share the same air. Do you think they are right to question us? Mira asked quietly, moving closer. She stood a few feet away now, her figure backlit by the dim light of the moons. I think they're scared, Ethan said after a moment. They see something they don't understand, and instead of trying to learn from it, they want to shut it down. Arcturians often value clarity over ambiguity, Mira said, and many humans appear to feel the same. Perhaps our interactions blur the lines that others prefer to remain sharply defined. Ethan couldn't help but smirk. You always have a way of putting things into perspective. It is merely an observation, she said, though her gaze softened. He exhaled deeply, his frustration easing just a little. Still, it's getting harder to balance all this. I came here to make peace, not to make things more complicated. Do you regret our time together? She asked, her voice calm but with a faint undercurrent of something more, something close to vulnerability. No, Ethan said, shaking his head firmly. I don't regret it at all. They stood in silence for a moment, the sounds of the night filling the space between them. Mira stepped closer, her movements deliberate, until she stood only a few feet away. Ethan felt the air change, subtle but unmistakable. Then perhaps we should stop allowing others to dictate our actions, Mira said. If we find value in this connection, is that not what matters most? Ethan met her gaze. You really believe that? I do, she said simply. You have shown me a different perspective, one I might never have considered otherwise. I would not dismiss that. He didn't know if it was her words or the calm certainty in her voice, but something shifted in him. The tension he'd been carrying for weeks seemed to loosen just a bit. I guess I've been overthinking it, Ethan admitted, worrying about what everyone else thinks instead of focusing on what I actually want. And what do you want? Mira asked. I want to see where this goes, Ethan said honestly, his voice quiet but firm. I want to stop feeling like I'm walking on eggshells every time I talk to you. I want this to matter. It already does, Mira said, taking a small step closer. To me, it already matters. Ethan felt his breath catch as the distance between them closed. They were close enough now that he could see the faint reflection of the moons in her silver eyes. His hand moved slightly, almost instinctively, brushing against hers. She didn't pull away. He didn't know who moved first. Maybe they both did, but in the next moment, their lips met. It was soft at first, tentative, as if both were afraid of breaking some unspoken rule. But then the hesitation faded. The kiss deepened, carrying with it all the unspoken feelings that had been building for weeks. When they finally broke apart, Myra's gaze lingered on his face. Is this what you mean by following what you want? Ethan let out a quiet laugh, his forehead resting against hers. Yeah, that's exactly what I mean. Myra's lips quirked into the faintest of smiles. Then I understand. They stood there, under the watchful gaze of the moons, neither saying another word. For the first time in what felt like ages, Ethan wasn't worried about the next meeting, the next challenge, or the next accusation. In that moment, there was only Mira, her hand now lightly resting in his, and the quiet understanding they had found together. Chapter 7: The Choice. The tension in the conference hall was palpable. Delegates from all over the galaxy filled the space, their voices a low hum of speculation and disagreement. Ethan sat toward the middle of the long table, Mira at his side, both of them scanning the faces of the representatives as the council speaker called the room to order. The final terms of the treaty are before us, the speaker announced. It is now time for final comments before we move to a vote. Ethan glanced at Mira. She sat with her usual calm composure, her gaze fixed on the documents before her. Over the past weeks, their interactions had grown both more frequent and more personal, but in this room, she remained the picture of professionalism. Still, Ethan knew the truth. Behind that controlled exterior, Mira faced a choice that was growing harder with every passing day. The Arcturian command had made it clear. Her involvement with Ethan, both professional and personal, was becoming a liability. The speaker continued, calling on representatives one by one to offer their perspectives. Some gave measured endorsements of the treaty's benefits, while others voiced their reservations, citing mistrust or a lack of confidence in certain clauses. Ethan tried to stay focused, but his mind kept drifting back to the conversation he and Mira had shared the previous night. "I can feel it," Ethan had said quietly, sitting across from her in the dimly lit lounge. "They're pushing you to cut ties." Mira had regarded him for a long moment before replying. "They believe it would simplify matters." "Do you believe that?" he'd asked. "I believe it would change nothing," she said softly. "The treaty would remain complex, the negotiations would still face resistance, and the challenges of fostering understanding between our species would not disappear. But they'd have you back in line," Ethan had said, his voice bitter. "It is not about control," she'd replied, though her tone suggested otherwise. "It is about maintaining clarity. For them, my connection to you introduces variables they are unprepared to address." Back in the conference hall, Ethan snapped out of his memory as the speaker called his name. He stood, cleared his throat, and addressed the council. "This treaty isn't perfect," Ethan began, "but that's not a reason to reject it. It's a framework, a starting point. We've spent months hashing out these details, finding common ground, and listening to each other. That in itself is an achievement." He paused, his eyes briefly meeting Myra's before continuing. "And if we've learned anything, it's that collaboration, even when it's difficult, is worth pursuing. We're not just writing a contract here. We're deciding how we'll work together as neighbors in this galaxy. That takes compromise, patience, and yes, trust." Ethan sat down, his words met with a mix of nods and skeptical murmurs. The speaker moved on, but Ethan didn't hear much of what followed. His mind was back on Mira and the choice she had to make. After the session adjourned, Ethan lingered by the entrance, waiting for Mira. She appeared a few minutes later, her expression unreadable. "Walk with me?" she asked quietly. They stepped out into the vast atrium, the enormous glass dome above them revealing the twin moons and the endless stars beyond. Mira walked slowly, her hands clasped behind her back. Ethan stayed by her side, waiting for her to speak. "I have been given a directive," she said at last, her voice carefully controlled. "To end this?" Ethan asked, already knowing the answer. "To reassert my neutrality," she corrected. "To ensure that my actions are not influenced by personal ties." Ethan stopped walking, turning to face her. "You know this isn't just a personal tie. What we've built, what we're trying to do here, it's more than that." Myra's gaze met his. "I know, but my superiors are not concerned with what it means to us. They are concerned with perception, with how our actions appear to others." "And you? What are you concerned with?" Ethan asked, his voice firm but not angry. Mira looked away for a moment, her jaw tightening. "I am concerned with the treaty, with its success, and with—" She hesitated, then said softly, "With you." Ethan reached out, gently touching her arm. "Then don't let them dictate what happens next. You've always followed the rules, Mira. You've always done what's expected. Maybe now's the time to follow something else." She glanced at his hand, then back at his face. "You think I should abandon my duties? I think you should consider what you actually want," Ethan said. "Not what they want. Not what the council wants. What do you want?" Mira was silent for a long moment, her expression shifting from controlled neutrality to something more open, more uncertain. "What I want," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "is to find a path where I do not have to choose between my people and—" She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't have to. Ethan knew what she meant. "There's always a way," Ethan said quietly, "even if it's not the one they're pushing you toward." Mira looked at him, and for once, she seemed less like the untouchable Arcturian officer and more like someone struggling with a decision she never expected to face. "Perhaps you are correct," she said finally. They stood together under the dome, the stars and moons casting their light over them, the weight of the choice still heavy in the air. Chapter 8. A New Dawn. Ethan stood at the edge of the balcony, looking out over the courtyard as the first hints of light touched the horizon. The twin moons were beginning to fade, their silvery glow giving way to the warm colors of dawn. Behind him, Mira emerged from the shadows, her footsteps light and deliberate. He turned at the sound, offering a faint smile. "I didn't think you'd come," Ethan said, his voice quiet. "I needed time to consider your words," Mira replied, stepping up beside him, "to determine what I truly wanted." Ethan nodded, his gaze shifting back to the horizon. "And?" Mira didn't respond immediately. She stood silently at his side, her hands clasped behind her back, watching as the sky grew brighter. Finally, she said, "I wish to see the treaty succeed, to create a foundation that our people can build upon. And I wish to continue this," she gestured between them, "without compromising my integrity or yours." Ethan turned toward her, surprised. "You mean that?" "I do," Mira said, meeting his eyes. "I have been following protocol my entire life, doing what was expected, ensuring every decision was calculated and precise. But you have shown me another way, a path where understanding and connection matter just as much as duty." Ethan chuckled softly. "I guess I do have a knack for shaking things up. It is unsettling, but also enlightening," Mira admitted. "I believe it is worth pursuing." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The sound of the distant marketplace stirred below, signaling the city's slow return to life. The light climbed higher, casting long shadows across the balcony and illuminating Myra's face. She looked more open now, less guarded, as if the weight she had carried for so long had eased just a little. "So what now?" Ethan asked. Myra's expression grew thoughtful. "Now we finalize the treaty, together. And once it is signed, we continue to learn from each other, to understand not just our differences, but how they can strengthen us." "That sounds like a pretty solid plan," Ethan said with a grin. "No more walking on eggshells?" "No more," Mira confirmed, a hint of a smile touching her lips. "We will face the challenges ahead as equals, not as adversaries, and not as mere representatives of our respective worlds, but as individuals who have found value in what others dismissed." Ethan extended a hand toward her. "So, a partnership then?" Mira regarded his hand for a moment before placing hers in his. Her touch was firm yet gentle. "A partnership," she agreed. They stood there as the sun finally broke free of the horizon, its light spreading warmth over the city. The tension that had once lingered between them was gone, replaced by a quiet understanding. Together, they would navigate the uncertain road ahead, not as pawns in a larger political game, but as two people who had chosen to find common ground. Ethan glanced over at Mira. "You know, this might actually work." Mira tilted her head, her gaze steady. "It already is."